ALF Autopsy, aka Consider Me Gone Part 2. Remember Laserdisc? No? Me neither. I've heard of them, but never saw one, as the format was extremely rare in Europe, but then I went to Japan about 5 years ago. Japan's got this reputation as being a country in the future, and yeah, there is technology everywhere. Some of it's cutting edge, but you're just as likely to find fax machines, toaster ovens, punch cards, floppy disks, and indeed, laser discs. In Osaka, Japan's second city, if you will, it's a giant megalopolis of epic overpasses and neon lights. Laser discs are even today readily available. In Denden Town, the city's electronics and otaku haven, laser discs line shelves alongside VHS and DVD. I was over there to work as an English teacher, but in my spare time I wandered around the multitudinous alleyways, subways, high streets, exploring, walking, drinking sake, one-cups, and eating tokawasa and gyoza at all hours. In the district of Denden Townie, also known as Nipponbashi, there was plenty of interest to the Western tourist. Maid cafes with young women in soubrette cosplay, serving tea with bone china teapots in response to the delicate little bells placed on each table. Multi-story manga and anime stores with 7-feet-tall Gundam guarding the doorways. I remember a strange, unmarked doorway, the only information on the sign outside being a colorful drawing of an angry carrot with muscular arms wearing high heels and stockings. I never stepped through that door. Probably never will. Another thing you need to know about Japan as a whole, and Osaka in particular, is it has a homeless problem. There seems to be no support structure at all for people with social problems, unemployment, poverty, drug dependency, not even an attempt to sweep them out of sight. Alongside many roads, under bridges, on traffic islands, and city parks, there are people living in tents, in semi-permanent shacks, sheds. Some of these guys are in terrible states. I once saw an old man step out of his roadside shed in bare feet, his toes, toenails, so mangled they looked like broken bones sticking out of stumpy raw flesh. Others are fairly well dressed, like salarymen down on their luck. Even Osakajo Kon, the grounds to Osaka's famous castle, where Tokugawa defeated the Toyotomi in 1615, establishing the 250-year dominance of the Tokugawa shogunate, in case you didn't know, has inhabited shacks and tarpaulin strung up between the cherry blossoms. Despite the number of people living homeless, it is exceedingly rare to see anyone begging or even busking for a change. For that reason, it drew my attention when, one night, while out walking in Nakanoshima-kon, Kon means park, I saw what appeared to be a rudimentary store. Outside a tiny wooden hut of scrap wood and metal, not big enough for one person to lie down in, sat an elderly, bearded man in disgusting clothes. On his feet, he wore plastic bags from 7-Eleven, and in front of him, laid on the ground on a square of tarpaulin, was a random array of scrounged old tat. I glanced across as I continued walking. It had passed midnight, but in a place like Osaka, that means little. Restaurants and shops were still open. The park was full of life. Besides the homeless people, there was also the drunk salarymen sleeping off a skinful of sake, the young lovers, the practicing musicians. Because of the flimsy nature of walls in Japanese apartments, a couple wanting time to themselves can actually find more privacy in a public park than they can at home. As I continued my walk, I saw a young man practicing drums. Set up a full kit with bass drum, snare, toms, hi-hat, the whole lot. He was bashing away on the grass under the heavy loaded bow of the cherry blossom. I walked around the path, doubling back on myself and heading back the way I came. I was getting tired. I had to be up early, but I was enjoying the sights in the moonlight. As I walked past the old homeless man for the second time, we accidentally made eye contact, just for a second, and we both looked down at his arrangement of objects. I walked over to where he sat and stood before him. My Japanese was, and is, if you haven't noticed, poor, so when he spoke, I couldn't make it out. Partly it was due to my lack of fluency, but also it was the tinny croak he spoke in, a fast staccato like an overstimulated Geiger counter. I tried to mumble a few words in Japanese, but soon settled with a, "Sorry, I don't understand." "Say letto o cheap," he said, pointed to one item which appeared to be a bundle of short electrical cables with the 2-pin plug still attached. The appliances they once serviced were nowhere to be seen. "Gyohaku-en." 500 yen, I figured. About $5 American, 2 pounds and 50 pence British. He pointed to another item. A rubber Anpenman doll's head which looked like it had been run over by a car. "Gyoko-hen." Stained, wrinkled, softcore porn magazine cover star, a young Japanese lady, a girl, really, with painted lips and a black bikini. "Gyohaku-en." A hubcap from a Toyota. "Gyohaku-en." A carrier bag, 7-Eleven, containing a small pile of partially smoked cigarettes. "Gyohaku-en." A dead bird. "Gyohaku-en." A sodden pair of trousers looking like they'd been recently fished out of one of Osaka's many rivers. "Gyohaku-en." A 12-inch by 12-inch cardboard square sleeve with the disc inside. "Gyohaku-en." I bent to get a closer look. Cardboard had once been white, but had clearly been soaked and dried out once or twice and stored in damp conditions. It was wrinkled and peeled and scuffled with filth. In a corner I could make out the image of 3 eggs in a line. The initials NHK were written across them, the logo for Japan's public broadcasting station. I picked it up, turned it over. On the back was some faded, handwritten kanji which I had no chance of deciphering, and the katakana for a-le-fu. I tipped the sleeve sideways to let the disc slip out into my hand, and up to that point I'd expected to see the shiny blackness of vinyl. Instead, I saw the silver of Laserdisc catching the streetlight, shimmering veins of electric blue like motor oil on water. Even so, there was significant scratching in the odd patch where the aluminum surface had peeled, revealing the plastic beneath. I didn't know what the disc was and wasn't convinced it would play at all, but it was significantly curious, and the old guy obviously needed the money. I paid him a 500 yen coin and thanked him too politely. "Thank you. Domo arigato gozaimasu." He bowed his head a little, and I set off walking, the Laserdisc tucked under my arm. A few hundred feet away, I heard him muttering and yelping, and when I glanced back, saw he was looking in my direction. I couldn't understand any of what he said, and the wind blew gently, taking his words away into treetops and high-rise apartment blocks and the light-polluted night sky. I didn't own a Laserdisc player, so the disc was forgotten for a couple of weeks. It spent some time on the coffee table, on the floor, under the sofa, propped up beside the TV, anywhere it could be ignored. I had no intention of ever doing anything with it, and certainly wasn't going to buy a Laserdisc player just to find out that the disc was damaged beyond repair. An American friend was over one day and noticed the disc. He asked about it, and I told him how I had acquired it. He agreed it looked unlikely to play, and also couldn't read the handwritten kanji on the sleeve, but said he knew a Japanese technical expert with the equipment and know-how to potentially salvage it. He contacted him, and a couple of days later, when he was available, we visited him at his apartment. Most Japanese living rooms have the usual stuff: seating, TV, dining table, etc. But in this apartment, the living room was full of sound and video equipment. Computers, digital, analog tape decks, wires stretched and tangled everywhere, monitor screens, speakers in stacks. He took one look at the Laserdisc and agreed there wouldn't be much surviving data, but of what there was he could salvage. He had a high-end player called Muse High Vision, which he said could read through defects that a normal player couldn't. That ran through a processing amplifier into the capture card of one of his many PCs and the specialist software it contained. He told us he would need time to clean it up and encode it, and we should leave him to it, as it would be boring to watch. We agreed. Went to a nearby bar for a few beers, a couple of rounds of yakitori, grilled skewers of different parts of chicken, brass neck, crispy skin, meatballs, heart, liver, cartilage. It's great beer food. Our technical expert friend knew where we were and said he would be round to collect us when he'd finished. A couple of hours later, when we were nicely drunk and our bellies were full, we began wondering if he would be much longer. And just as my friend was about to make a call, our technical expert was suddenly standing there beside our table. His face was white and gaunt, whiter and gaunter than you'd expect from someone with such a dedication to digital technology, and he placed the Laserdisc with its sleeve and a black DVD box on the table. Without saying anything, he turned to leave. My friend and I looked at each other, and he grabbed the techie sleeve with the weight. Despite his reluctance, we got him to sit with us and had a drink brought over for him. He drank quickly like he couldn't wait to be out of there and wouldn't answer any questions about what he'd found on the disc. He said it was all there on an AVI stored on the DVD and we should take it and go. He repeatedly warned us of watching it. He deleted it from his computer and we would be well advised to destroy both discs and forget about them. I asked him if he could read the scrawled kanji from the Laserdisc sleeve. It means nothing, he said. Nothing he could understand, anyway. He said it was an ancient character set and compared it to me trying to decipher Old English written in the densest Gothic script. He didn't want any payment for his work, he just wanted to forget about it, but I managed to force 3,000 yen notes into his hand. He thanked me repeatedly, graciously bowing his head, and asked pathetically if he could go now. We said sure. He got up, basically ran out of the door, without saying another word. Well, we couldn't understand his reaction at all. He was either a very eccentric and nervous man normally, or he'd seen something terribly unsettling that he was struggling to come to terms with. We, of course, had had a few drinks, so we dismissed him as a weirdo and we laughed about it. But, in retrospect, I know his behavior had been understandable. In fact, I think he held it together well just by bringing the disc to us. Had I been in his position, I may have disappeared from contact, turned off my phone, ignored the doorbell, until we went away. I may have called the police and reported us for suspicion of committing insane and terrible crimes. I may have babbled and drooled my way into a secure mental institute where I could hang my head against soft walls. Till I died old and alone, except for the insects in my mind and under my skin. Soon we left the bar. We were excited to get back to my apartment and watch the disc. Much to my regret, that is what we did. The few cans of Chuhai to keep the drinking mood going, I stuck the unlabeled DVD into the drive of my laptop. There was one file on the disk, an AVI with a random alphanumeric name, something like 000-A54H4.AVI. I double-clicked it and full-screened the video. It troubles me to think back to what we saw, those terrible sights that sobered us up and kept us from finishing our drinks. It's kept sleep away for most of the last 5 years and effectively ended our friendship. That ruined our night, troubled our lives. Regardless, I will try to remember all I saw of that video. Disgusting nightmare vision of what appeared to be the lost final episode of the 1980s American family sitcom Alf. The conclusion to the cliffhanger with Saw captured by the alien task force. The video began with a loud, high-pitched squealing sine wave tearing through our ears. On screen was a test card pattern, vertical bands of bright color at the top half, blocks black, white, gray at the bottom. This remained on screen for about a minute, occasionally broken up by pixelated blocks of digital distortion, the whole while accompanied by the high-pitched sine wave. Suddenly nothing. Black screen. Silence. After a wait, which felt like minutes but could just as easily have been seconds, the screen flickered like an old video cassette, presumably from an earlier analog-to-digital transfer. And still, the occasional explosions of digital distortion from the corrupted laserdisc. The NHK logo began fading into the black background, but suddenly glitched out, the screen breaking up into pixelated blocks and shouting out with a burst of white noise that disappeared as quickly as it appeared. What remained on the flickering screen was a view down a dirty, dimly lit corridor. The floor and walls appeared tiled like some sort of hospital, but filthy and damaged everywhere, as though it had been the scene of floods and massacres. Most of the lights were out, and the ones that worked flickered intermittently. The only sound was the occasional electronic buzz of the lights, almost too quiet to perceive. All down the corridor, into the distance, were double hospital doors with small windows in at eye level. A quiet, pathetic whimper or groan of pain and defeat emerged slowly through the electronic buzz, a tearful sobbing of someone reduced to helplessness by torture and humiliation. Suddenly, digital distortion ripped away the image and brought it back with the camera moving down the corridor and screaming guttural roars. Someone in one of the rooms was evidently being subjected to an heinous ordeal, with words can't be expressed. Only the scream of unanesthesiaed cutting, tearing. Up until this point, we'd been fairly good-humored about the video, but something about the screaming and sobbing unsettled us. This wasn't the sound of acting, more the sound of real agony, the sound of someone or something being maimed and mauled by hands trained in the art of cruelty. As the camera continued down the corridor and the screaming grew worse and worse, other voices joined in. Various desperate calls and screams in a range of pitches and bizarre alien languages tore out as if from beings imprisoned in the rooms leading off from the corridor, and they howled in response to the pain of their fellow inmate. The screams built to a crescendo, and the flickering video distortion worsened to the point the picture was completely obscured, and just as the noise was so bad I thought I would cry, more digital distortion and white noise ripped through everything. Picture returned with an image that shocked us. It made us cry out in horror, surprise, and almost an absurd burp of laughter. The chorus of screams was silenced, and the image on screen was so unexpected to us. Collision of the familiar childhood image with such unspeakable viciousness. A contradiction that broke our minds. Filling the screen was Alf, the alien life form from the TV series of the same name. The shot was close up, showing his head and shoulders from above as he lay strapped to a stainless steel dissection table. White light poured down on him from out of shot, making the image stark and overexposed, even though the flicker of worn-out video was present. He lay with his head to one side, his fur matted with dark blood. Various wires and electrodes penetrated the top of his head. He sobbed gently. His pain was unbearable. Genuine suffering which made us desperate to reach out and help a fellow living creature. His expression of pain was both human and animal. He began to turn his head. The effort was clearly about as much as he could muster, and after a few failed attempts and tired whimpers, he faced the camera with closed eyes. more digital distortion and white noise. And then Alf opened his eyes, beaten, bloodshot, strangely human eyes as though a person were trapped beneath Alf's skin. He tried to speak. "Please, I miss you," croaked. "I miss you." His words were translated into Japanese subtitles. And as the title, the word ALF in the big white letters of that familiar font in its katakana Japanese subtitle translation appeared on screen, Alf let out a horrendous blood-curdling scream, out of breath, panting and screaming until his voice was hoarse and he could scream no more, but still, between sobs and desperate gasps for breath, he screamed and screamed and screamed. He stared into the camera with those teared-up, dying, pleading eyes, staring at us, at me, as he screamed and screamed. This must have gone on for a few minutes at least, and just when we thought we could take no more, just when the constant screaming was eating away at our very souls, that terrible saxophone music started. We couldn't believe it, along with the continued screams. The saxophone-led theme song from the 3rd and 4th seasons of ALF began to play. It was that same music, but somehow rawer, as if pushed through overloaded speakers and re-recorded onto a wax cylinder, and then blasted out again at ear-splitting volume. And between interspersed cuts of jolly scenes from the past, shots of the Tanner family, credits starring Max Wright and Shadeen, random rips of analog and digital distortion increasing in severity all the time, were images of terrible torture. A close-up of a hand being drilled, a leg being hobbled with a sledgehammer, and all the while that hideous screaming and panting and screaming and crying. The quality of the footage was deteriorating still, and as the happy memories and torture and miserable wails and distortion and saxophone music and white noise coalesced, I began to feel sick. All those terrible experiences built up to a roar, and suddenly the video jumped and stuck on a loop. A split second of smiling Willie Tanner, with starring Max Wright emblazoned across, a full body shot of Alf strapped to the tabletop with his torso peeled open, revealing the beating, bleeding insides of his alien anatomy. These two hideous images, jumping, cutting, looping between each other at irregular intervals, all the while the screaming, the white noise, the distorting, lumping saxophone stuck, and I swear under all the clamor I could hear the maniacal laughter of Alf himself. These two images looped for so long that I began to think it was the actual AVI that was skipping somehow, but checking it I saw the VLC time slider moving along naturally. The looping continued until more serious distortion obliterated all sound and visuals, replacing them with pixelated blocks and indistinguishable noise. When the picture returned, it was of a lower quality still, and the scene had changed. The camera, now camcorder quality, seemed to be lying slightly over to its side on a tabletop, looking across the room to the autopsy table, where Alf laid strapped down. Lighting was dim, and a green tinge to the picture suggested night vision. The scene was obscured by someone stepping in front of the camera, a person in doctor's scrubs, gloves, and apron, all heavily stained with blood and feces. They adjusted the camera slightly and stepped back out of shot. Alf, who may have been lying unconscious, seemed to come to, and began mumbling and whimpering and begging, "No, no, please, no," his head moving side to side slightly. He appeared delirious, distressed. and barely alive. The doctor walked back in the shot and stood with his back to the camera beside Alf in the autopsy table. His features were covered with a gray surgeon's hat and face mask. He stood over Alf, looking down on him, and appeared to be talking. We couldn't hear a word he said, just the occasional calm consonant penetrating through Alf's sobbing and pleading, and the slight movements of head and shoulders. The scene remained unchanged except for the persistent random interference of distortion for maybe 5 minutes. 5 minutes of inaudible calm speech. Unchanged except for occasional sudden jump cuts to the smiling faces of Kate, Lynn, and Brian Tanner, who seemed to be looking on in curious glee. It was as though the surgeon, the torturer, was explaining matter-of-factly exactly what he was going to be doing to Alf. The sobbing and pleading continued throughout, then a brief flash of distortion and white noise leading suddenly to blackness. I don't know how long the blackness here lasted. It may not even have been on the video. Perhaps I passed out momentarily, or shock has just left a blank hole in my memory. Whatever really happened when the picture came back, the scene had changed yet again. The camera was on the move, held in the hand of someone I presumed to be the surgeon, not pointed at anything, but swinging about wildly with the movements of the arm. This was dizzying, producing blurred effects of blood-stained walls and spilled gore like an abattoir floor. Soon it steadied and swung around to the autopsy table where lay the mutilated, headless corpse of Alf. Jump cut to Kate, Lynn, Brian in happy conversation. Camera panned along the body and upward toward the ceiling, toward the source of an arrhythmic drip of dark liquid. There, hanging by cables and wires, was the severed, silenced head of Alf. His scalp shaved and ears snipped off to allow access for the multitudinous penetrating electrodes. Below the stump of his neck hung the spine pulled from his body, and although I didn't notice at the time, in retrospect it occurred to me that there was something wrong. Well, obviously it was all wrong. I mean, there was something not as you'd expect about the spine. Rather than being the repeating structure of small separate vertebrae, the spine began at the neck as 2 long, thin parallel bones which ran half the length and terminating at a joint where they connected to a single, thicker bone running down the rest of the way. Thinking back, I'd become convinced over time that Alf's spine was not a spine, but the bones I saw were the radius, ulna, and humerus of a human arm. As the camera held on this scene for a moment and the words created by Paul Fusco faded onto the screen, Alf's eyes blinked open and he looked directly into the camera. The voice of the cameraman sounded, the voice of the surgeon, the voice of Willie Tanner saying, "Good morning, Alf." Alf screamed a scream of guttural anguish, and the credit sequence rolled. Humorous pictures of Alf drinking from the toilet, trying on glasses, peeking through the blinds, wearing headphones, all that stuff. Instead of the theme tune playing, was just that screaming, desperate, panting, crying. Immediately as the video ended, I turned and was sick over the arm of the sofa onto the wall. Sick again. I wrestled against the arm, trying to recover my strength for a minute or two, and eventually looked over at my friend. He sat motionless, mouth clamped shut, eyes wide open, empty, hands held out in what could have been a shrug or begging or even praying. I called his name, got no response. I shook him by the knee, then the shoulder, and called his name again and again, and suddenly, finally, he snapped out of it, and a bit of life came back into his eyes, just a bit. He looked around the room as if wondering where he was, and over at me. We looked at each other, shocked, disbelieved. I felt the rise of more vomiting. I rushed to the toilet and heaved and spat and sobbed through my mouth and nose. And as this was going on, I heard the front door close. When I came out of the bathroom, my friend had gone, and so had the Laserdisc, and so had the DVD from my laptop. The disc tray was open, and VLC was open on the desktop, but the file was gone. Had I wanted to play it again, which I definitely did not, I wouldn't have been able to. After I cleaned up my vomit and failed to contact my friend, who wasn't answering his phone, I went to bed but failed to fall asleep. I laid for hours staring at the ceiling with terrible images running through my mind. At one point I thought I heard a voice somewhere in the apartment and managed to buck up the courage to investigate, but found no one. I returned to bed with the lights on and drifted off eventually to fits of terrible, indefinable nightmares. I woke up wet with my own urine. Can't remember ever having done that before. I didn't see or hear from my friend again, and over time grew more disinclined to contact him. Now, if I saw him in the street, I think I'd turn and walk the other way for fear of what might happen should our shared memories get together again. Since watching that video, I've suffered severe sleep disorder and been through therapy to try to quell the constant obsessive repetition of unwanted extreme mental imagery. A few months after watching the video, I returned home to England and haven't returned to Japan since. Although it's been 5 years and 6,000 miles away, I still can't get away from it. I carry the imagery with me in my head, and I suspect my old friend does too. I don't know where he is or how he's doing, but last week I received an email headed ALF Autopsy from one of those anonymous temporary accounts. I deleted the email and powered down my computer.